Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the PERSOLKELLY Workforce of the Future discussion. We're very glad that you could join us. There's still a few people joining us. So, we're going to slowly ease into this as we start. But thank you so much. We hope that this will be a very productive conversation where there's lots to learn and lots to share. So let me go ahead and put this music on pause and we will begin. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. We'll go ahead and start. So I'm 𝗪𝗏𝗍𝗫 with PERSOLKELLY. I am helping out in the Learning Academy, and I'm based in Seoul, South Korea, where I am now. So 안녕하세요 to all of you who may be Korean. And today we have an incredible lineup of speakers who are going to share perspective with you. And let me take a few moments just to introduce the people that are with us. So, let's begin with Lisa. So Lisa is currently Director of HR Service Delivery for 𝗪𝗲𝗄𝗏 in Asia Pacific. She's worked in the technology sector for over 25 years. She's had senior HR roles across Microsoft, Oracle, Gartner, and was most recently HR Director for SAP ANZ. So she's joined 𝗪𝗲𝗄𝗏 in 2017, and she's focused on their HR transformation agenda and building a service delivery model across Asia Pacific. So she's focused on rolling out Workday, optimizing HR and payroll operations across 14 countries, and governance and compliance issues. Thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. Our next panelist is 𝗪𝗏𝗄𝗏. So Derek has 22 years of experience working in a variety of generalist and specialist functions in HR, and he's worked in multiple countries in HR leadership roles. He spent the majority of his career in healthcare companies, including Eli Lilly, Johnson & Johnson, and now AstraZeneca. In his current role, he oversees the human resources function in the Asia area, covering India, ASEAN, Taiwan, and South Korea. He's also a leading internal talent development program consistent with the future of work for AstraZeneca's international region. Outside of HR, he's done sales, and he's consulted on SAP SuccessFactors in Malaysia in the past. Thank you so much for joining us today, Derek. And our last but not our least panelist, 𝗕𝗂𝗁𝗏. He has over 20 years of experience in the recruitment space in Asia and the US, with a wealth of experience leading large, high-performing regional talent acquisition teams. His expertise in technology recruitment and all-around foundation in internal TA, RPO, executive search, and contract staffing have shaped his strong market reputation of being able to deliver with great success. Prior to joining Carousel Group, he held senior leadership positions with NTT, UST, Talent2, Merrill Lynch, Kelly Services, and DBS. He holds a Bachelor in Economics from Delhi University and a Master in International Trade. Thank you so much for joining us today, 𝗕𝗂𝗁𝗏. And last but not least, Elvin. He brings over 20 years of experience in the workforce solutions industry, progressing from operations, sales, to branch leadership roles, and now is regional director overseeing account management, regional sales, and general leadership for PERSOLKELLY Asia Pacific. He's a key member of the regional executive leadership team, and he plays important roles in streamlining strategies and initiatives across the region, developing capabilities for future executive teams for succession planning. Thank you so much for joining us today, Elvin. So with that, here are our speakers. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a brief overview of the research that we conducted earlier this year. So PERSOLKELLY conducted research for its Workforce of the Future 2021 Workforce Insights Report. Once we published this research, it was very well received, picked up by multiple major media, given a lot of coverage. It seemed to hit the right buttons and highlight some of the key challenges that companies are having preparing for their workforces of the future. We surveyed 1,500 decision makers at different employers across Asia Pacific. We surveyed a variety of industries ranging from automotive, banking, insurance, healthcare, life science, IT, manufacturing, professional services, and consultants, construction, et cetera. So it's really a broad cross-section of research across Asia Pacific, 1,500 decision makers who helped us better understand the key challenges that they're having building their workforces. And so just a brief summary of some of the key messages from that research. So one, the top challenges that we heard from our survey recipients, many companies really struggling with the global mobility constraints. Obviously, especially in the era of COVID, it was very difficult to have people move around, and we're still dealing with some of those challenges now. I mean, some countries are just starting to allow more international movement. So this is a challenge that the companies will still have to deal with. A lot of companies reported that they were having big challenges sourcing and finding the right talent, especially locally. So many companies report that they're struggling with very high attrition and turnover rates. So it's not enough that you recruit great talent, but you need to be able to keep that talent. And this has been a big challenge for many organizations. The cost of hiring has definitely increased. Many companies are struggling to maintain, to control the cost of hiring, especially in the technology space, where there's literally an arms race and there are very, very large salaries, in order to recruit the top talent. And then there's a big challenge for many organizations just in terms of giving their employees or helping their employees develop the right skills for their future, for the future of work, for the future strategies that they're going to need, especially to rebuild post-COVID. That was a big challenge for many of our survey respondents. 85% of the respondents admit that one of their key challenges is building their workforce, and they're really having a hard time with that. Of the skills that were being recruited, the technology skills and the sales skills were the most in-demand skills that many companies reported having challenges finding the right talent. 55% of the companies were open to engaging international talent or overseas talent, especially when they couldn't find that talent locally. And 50% of companies are open to hybrid work arrangements in the future. So even after COVID, it may not be the case that employees return to a full-time office environment. That being said, the roles that were most in demand were technology roles and business development, closely followed by digital marketing, e-commerce skills. So that's sort of a summary of some of the key findings of our 2021 Workforce Insights report, the Workforce of the Future. And now we're going to hear from Elvin, who's going to share a little bit of perspective based upon the companies that we work with. And please, Elvin, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. So I think to get this going, I think the first thing is to talk about workforce of the future. I think there are many discussions on what exactly is workforce of the future. Personally, I like what has been described by Deloitte, and I thought it is a good platform to share with you. According to them, okay, there are two powerful forces that affect the future of work. And obviously, the first one is the growing adoptions of artificial intelligence, robotics, and automations. And the second part is actually on the expansion of the workforce to include both on and off balance sheet talents. In this case, what Deloitte is referring to will be the full-time employee, which is on balance sheet, and all other form of engagement, which is the managed service, contingent workforce, or even for freelancers. And they have actually put into perspective on three areas. The first one is actually what work will look like in the future itself. And in this case itself, we are putting a lot into how technology can play a part in terms of automations. The second is actually on the composite of the workforce itself, on who can actually deliver the work. In the past, we look at traditional on the full-time employee, but as the world evolves, there are many modes of engagement that we should actually consider. And the third one is actually on the workplace itself. whether the definitions of workplace is confined to 8 hours work locations in your office or any other form of engagement. In fact, one interesting thing is this figure that you have seen here is actually published by Deloitte in April 2019, and that's before the COVID itself. Okay, so with that, I would like to bring you into some of the details insight that we have actually found out. So what I would like to bring is two perspectives. One is from the recruitment and the other one on the retention. Having known that the greatest challenge that most of the company are facing, recruitment and retentions appear as the top two. So the first part is actually on the lack of local talent itself. According to our survey, right, Vietnam, China, and Singapore has highlighted that in their market, they face greatest challenge in terms of the local talent itself. On the other hand of the spectrum, of course, you have Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan that shows that they have least challenges in that space. So one of the common things that people will probably want to know is for a large population country like China, like Vietnam, why are they still facing a huge challenge in their market itself? And here we just want to highlight that in our conversation, many of the participants itself, here when we talk about talent, we are referring to skills. We're not purely talking about just a workforce itself. We are talking about skills in demand. I think Chris has shared earlier on the top skills in demand, including the tech space, including the sales itself. And I can give example, for example, in China itself, there is a growing industry for semicon itself. There is a lack of engineers that can perform the design and the manufacturing side. Same for Vietnam with growing manufacturing in their market itself. There is a lack of engineering in their space. So this is where a lot of our respondents have shared that they are facing challenge in the local market. And what this really say is that we should consider, besides engaging local talents, what other mode of workforce can actually help to supplement or complement the delivery of work itself. And that brings to the second challenges that we actually found out from the survey itself, which is the restriction on global mobility. And that itself is a concern for a lot of organizations because of the ability to so-called travel abroad. When I say traveling, right, as global mobility as a challenge itself, it's not necessarily talking about pure hiring. There are many companies in the region looking at expanding or assisting operations in the region itself. There is a concern that the traveling itself may not, restriction itself may not allow them to effectively perform their roles. So what we are looking here mainly is actually talking about hiring overseas talents to complement the local talents. The good news is 55% of the respondents have indicated that they are open to manage overseas talent, but half of them may not know how they can go about doing that. Concerns commonly coming from them will be number one on performance management. How do they go about managing the overseas talents as in terms of the deliverables itself? The next is actually there's no presence of office. How do we manage their payroll and all other statutory requirements itself? And the last part is actually on the language and cultural barrier. So these are the two common perspectives from the recruitment part. I'll move on quickly to the attritions, the retention part, which I think attritions, okay, is major considerations. Okay, based on the finding itself, okay, the top three market that shared concern is India, China, and Vietnam. It's not surprise that these countries have a good pool of talents and they are growing in their space itself, looking for very much tech talent. So there's intense competitions for the same pool of talents to every organization itself. But this is only one set of challenges to the attrition itself. The other one is obviously in terms of evolutions of how work can be performed. So we are also, through the pandemic itself, seeing a lot of the workforce moving into gig work or home-based work itself. So that is also taking away some of the talents from us as well. The last thing is none other than the great resignations that a lot of you have probably heard and talked about, mainly due to the Zoom fatigue or the preference to continue with the remote work arrangement. So there are many set of challenges for our respondents in terms of how they can retain their employees. And that actually lead us to find out from another perspective, okay, which is on the work style preference. On the work style preference, there are preference still very much on having the employee to work from office itself, mainly coming from China, Vietnam, and Thailand. This is very much due to one, cultural, and second one, the limitations in terms of infrastructure. There is a need for fundamental so-called infrastructure for some of the market like Vietnam, Thailand, in order for their employees to be able to work remotely. On the other hand, we have some of the market who are very supportive on work from home or remote work arrangement. In this case, we call hybrid. That means a mix of working from home and in the office itself, mainly from Malaysia, Singapore. And I think this market has actually weathered through the safe management measure itself, where they work on a lockdown environment and have to activate a business continuity plan, where they have to kickstart process of having their employees to work from home itself. Okay, and with that as a foundation, most of these participants have shared that they are more open and willing to go into a mixed work arrangement. The last part, okay, that I would like to share, okay, is actually on equipping employee with future-ready skills. According to the World Economic Forum itself, there are top 10 skills that are in demand. It's not surprisingly, we are talking about the technology savvy. We're talking about analytics, critical thinking, and problem-solving skill itself. But I think what essentially a lot of the respondents have shared with us is that as the market is evolving, okay, how can their employees pick up their skills to continue to cope with the evolutions of the job requirements coming from the various business environment itself. So these are the general findings that we have from the survey itself. And what this actually means to us is there are a few things that organization to look into when consider about building a workforce itself. First is actually building an agile workforce with diverse engagement mode, so that they are able to have more effective use of resource. The second is adoptions of flexible work model to attract and retain talents itself. Third is openness to hire remote talents to complement the shortfall in the local talents. And lastly, okay, to scale their business, they need to ensure that existing workforce are trained, reskills, and upskills itself. So these are just some of the perspective that we are able to get out of the insight itself. And I hope that this will allow you to have some perspective on planning your internal workforce strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elvin, for sharing. So a lot of challenges to discuss. So we're going to go into a panel discussion now, and let's go ahead and begin. So, the first question, I'm going to take a few moments just to allow each of our panelists to just briefly address, what do you see as some of your key challenges building your workforce of the future? Maybe we can start with 𝗪𝗲.
Thanks, Chris. Look, I think that there are some ongoing challenges, ones that we're already very, familiar with, and that's, employees wanting career growth and opportunity and compensation, and they're all of the sort of the standard, I guess, hygiene factors that candidates expect. But I think in the new environment, we're presented with some very new challenges, particularly over the last 18 months. It's very much a candidate's market at the moment, and we're finding that candidates are assessing multiple options. They're going beyond the standard considerations of a role, particularly with the new generation coming into the workforce. We're seeing lots of candidates interested in, innovation and the digitisation, the automation that's happening in the workforce, and the opportunities that lie ahead for them in that area. So I think that, we're facing many, probably more so than I've experienced in my career, challenges. The skills that are out in the market, and of course the changing world that we live in is requiring very, very quick, fast skill development as well. Everyone's competing for those. So I can see from the research that's just been presented, there's absolutely a challenge for finding the talent in the local markets. And we are certainly having to move offshore in many places to secure some of those niche skill sets that we're looking for. And then we're presented, of course, with the challenges of the border restrictions and not being able to relocate people. So there are certainly a number of challenges that we're facing, and we're having to come up with some strategies to work through those issues.
I'm glad that, it sounds like this is a challenge that a lot of companies are going to be dealing with. So I'd love to hear, Nikhil, do you have more to add? What would you say are some of the key challenges you think about when building your workforce of the future?
I'd say it's a challenge building a workforce for the present. The future is a long way ahead. I think right now itself, a lot of people are struggling at the moment. Borders are closed and you have the same talent being churned within country. So I'll go back maybe 14 years or so, 13, 14 years when I was working with Merrill Lynch. At that point of time, there were 3 other banks that started hiring the same talent. All of us were building the same. We were looking at technologies for trading platforms, and it was carnage at that time. I had a gentleman who left us, went to another bank after 6 months at 40%, another bank another 6 months 40%, another bank, and then came back to us at 125% increase.
I think I went into the wrong industry.
So there was a shortage then, and I've seen that, and what I'm seeing right now is very similar to what it was back then. And especially for the technology talent, for the engineering talent, I think everyone is looking for the same talent. And there was an article in one of the papers a couple of weeks back in Business Times about what are the 10 or 12 employers looking at the same talent. And let me take you through a different statistic. There are over 750 open recs for recruiters in Singapore at the moment as we speak. That itself is a challenge, finding a good recruiter in Singapore at the moment, that everyone has 4, 5, 6 options at the moment. So it's difficult. Now, what we need to figure out is how I'm working with my CLT and my CTO is, look, there is a challenge. We need to figure out a way to move ahead, and gig workers is one thing, but again, my CTO wants to make sure that the time difference is taken care of. So we can't go to, say, Eastern Europe. So we've identified 3 markets where we know we can have remote talent, right? And we're testing it out, and we're doing it in the phased manner. We put a project in place. We're doing it in the phased manner. 3 markets identified. Talent has been mapped. We've started speaking to the talent there, and we have a bar raiser in our organization. So we have 6, 7, 8 rounds of interviews, and we're taking a few of these people through the loops to see if this can work out or not. So we're having to figure out what are the different ways we can do it. And another way is obviously campus, but everyone wants the same campus people. Everyone wants campus, everyone wants technology people. So again, there's a shortage there. So there is a lot of challenges in the present times. And unless we can sort this out, I think future is still a long way ahead. But we have to put on our thinking caps and innovate, strategize, and move forward. And small things like, even you talk to a engineering candidate right now, you need to understand the pulse of the candidate in the current moment, because he's got 5 offers in hand or 6 offers in hand. You can't just tell him that, look, here's my offer, go and take it. He'll say that, look, I have these options. I spoke to someone this morning, and his push in life is quality of work and work-life balance. So understanding that from a recruiter's point of view has become another very important thing at the moment. So recruitment itself, I see changing in the current times. So it's interesting, but let's see how things pan out.
That's a very good point. Before we can get to the future, we do need to address some of these present day challenges. Derek, care to share perspective on some of the key challenges you see in the healthcare marketplace?
I just want to kind of continue from what Nikhil said, right? So now the question, and if you really think about it, is really, then my question to that question is, do we understand what we need in the future? So I think that's the starting point. I know we have elements that are going around. I mean, due to pandemic and due to other so-called environmental factors, right? It could be just a short-term supply demand kind of a crunch. But essentially, for us to address this question, do we really know what we need? Now, in any industry, especially let's say if I were to speak from even the perspective of a pharma company, what are the roles needed, let's say 5 years from now? How do we see 5 years from now the environment context is changing for us to be successful, for us to play to win in the industry that we compete in? Unless we are clear about that, it's hard to really say how am I going to build my workforce there. Now, what we've done in AstraZeneca is we basically did a bit of a crowdsource. We went to our employees, 56,000 of them, and say, hey, how do you see things in 5 years' time? And from that process, we kind of had certain themes that we bubble up, and this is done all at a global level. And some themes around, we need to dial up, for example, patient centricity. We need to dial up our understanding how we work with payers, because healthcare budget and all that's going to be a continuous challenge, right? A couple of years down the road, we start to think about how digital is going to impact the way we discover, develop, and deliver medicines, life-changing medicines to patients. So now, once we are clear on that, you can then start to say, hey, where we are today, and that is the 5 years, now essentially underpinned by probably what Elvin has shown, right? Context of rapid innovation, context of digitalization of work, in the context of human-machine integration, and how do we take up our workforce through that process. Now we're going to always have all these elements in between. My question is, now that we know that, who can we really skill? How fast can we do that? How broad can we do that? How scalable can we do that? And the more you ask these questions, actually, then the more we discover challenges that Elvin presented just now. And it's actually very consistent. I mean, regardless of the industry that you're in, there are going to be areas, especially digital, really high cognitive problem recognition, solving skills, co-creating, collaborating skills that we need to be successful. And importantly, I think in the industry that I work in, ethical. Just being ethical is so important for us to, in our industry. And that is not, we take that sometimes for granted, but it is a rare gem that, I would also look at, from a workforce point of view going forward.
The ethical part is always a challenge. We need more ethical leadership, and sometimes that's hard to get. So why don't we dive into some of the other questions that we have up here. So the first is, we heard from a lot of recipients that managing mobility was a big challenge. I'd love to hear just a little bit. Did any of you come up with some solutions or some better ways, or were there some particularly pressing challenges around mobility at any of your firms? Anybody want to volunteer for that?
I'm happy to chime in about mobility. We certainly have had challenges hiring or bringing candidates from overseas to locations in Asia Pacific, or transferring within Asia Pacific. That has caused some, some business issues, because we have customers to serve, and that's put pressure on the business to think of other ways to deliver to customers. And I think we all understand the issues there with border closures, much longer time for visa processing. We've certainly partnered very closely with our vendors, our immigration vendors, to try to expedite bringing our candidates into the country where we've hired them into roles. I think a couple of things or at least one thing we have done to overcome that is look at how we might be able to start those candidates working on projects, but in their existing location. Now that isn't as easy as it sounds in a global organization, and I'm sure many of you are shaking your heads saying, how do we do that? The reality is that they've accepted a job in a new country, so we need to then find a way of continuing their employment in their existing country and funding that in their existing country while we wait for them to transfer to their new location. So we have managed to do that a few times. That was one of the solutions we came up with. But, you know, we've been incredibly restricted the last 18 months with the border closures and the increasing focus on local hiring in many countries, and therefore the stringency around visa and immigration approvals. That's been a real challenge.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's definitely, you know, something we hear from many firms, but that's a very smart solution, right? Starting them off at least potentially in their home country, and then, you know, expediting their mobility as quickly as possible. Anything to add, Derek or Nikhil?
I'll just add to that. I think, you know, in the last 18 months or so, I mean, obviously we try to be flexible with you know, with the way we hire, especially let's say if we were to hire cross-border. I learned a lot more about, you know, permanent establishment risks and corporate tax, you know, issues in the last 18 months than, you know, probably 20 years of my career. Lots of conversations, you know, with you know, our tax colleagues as well as our global mobility colleagues.
I'm there with you, Derek, very much.
I know,
more than ever.
Exactly. So, but again, I mean, one of the things that we have done is also really ask ourselves the questions like, you know, I think we tend to bring people just, you know, without thinking for this way. It's almost like, you know, second nature. We bring folks together in one location. But, you know, in the last 18 months, we have had some roles where we have decided to say, hey, those roles don't really need to co-locate. And we have made decisions for some of those roles, even above market roles, to basically, you know, be done in the markets where we have presence. So, you know, some of our area director roles are actually done in the markets, not in Singapore. So although we have a kind of the core, you know, leadership team, you know, sitting in Singapore. So we have also asked ourselves the questions, and I think, you know, kind of make the right decisions, at least in the context of the last 18 months.
Good to hear. Do you expect it to change? I mean, now that it seems like things are kind of starting to open up a bit more, are you expecting things to sort of, if we've been going through something that's the opposite of the reversion to the mean, is a reversion to the mean much more in person, much more, you know, more mobility than in the past?
I think it's going to be a mix. Let me share with you maybe why I say that, right? In the last 18 months, you know, our medical reps in our industry, our medical reps go and see doctors on a day-to-day basis. It is actually quite interesting during major lockdowns, and in this part of the world, we've seen, you know, many markets have gone, you know, to lockdown mode, right? And as a result, we weren't really able to assess, you know, having face-to-face conversation with the HCPs, you know, the healthcare professionals, like what we, you know, used to do, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So during those moments of lockdowns, we kind of saw the adoption of, you know, virtual technology. So, you know, even the HCPs themselves were more comfortable with webinars, with virtual calls, with phone calls. But once the lockdowns were so-called loosened, you see, you know, a reverse back to behaviors, right? So this, like, you know, they prefer always a face-to-face connection. And we kind of saw, you know, that virtual adoption, you know, drop significantly, almost back to, you know, pre-pandemic levels. So, but I think there will always be some that, you know, the hybrid way of working will continue to stick. I think for me, I think we will also figure out a way where we will make hybrid, you know, work for us. Plus, you know, I think the way we think about business travel as well, I mean, we have committed to, you know, quite a lofty sustainability goal ourselves, right? Our, you know, our ambition zero carbon by certain, you know, time of the so-called time. And part and parcel of really challenging us, you know, do we need to travel? Do we need to bring 200 people instead of 5 people or 10 people? Is also around, you know, how are we in kind of, you know, contributing to sustainability? And I think that's going to kind of all come together as we make decisions, you know, on how we kind of go back to, you know, pre-pandemic, you know, travel.
So that's kind of naturally segues into, you know, we don't necessarily have to take these questions in the order they're written, but that naturally segues into the question of, what steps are you taking to improve remote and hybrid working arrangements? I'd love to hear Nikhil or Lisa or Derek, what kind of things have you been able to do to make that work better?
From a carousel perspective, Chris, a hybrid or flexi model has been there for long, or right from the beginning, because that's the culture of the organization. Trust your people. And with these changes coming through over the last couple of years, the impact's not been that much, because the model has worked and the model continues to work for us. And what we see is that the way our employees are empowered in Carousel, we don't have anyone taking undue advantage of this. That's something we've seen. There's not been any loss of productivity. So for me, for instance, I've got teams based across India, across Philippines, across Taiwan, across Malaysia, across other locations. Now within India, we are based at Bangalore, but I have someone sitting in the mountains up north. I think he'll be on this call also. He's sitting in Nainital up north, and there's someone else sitting in some other location. Yeah, but I don't see any issues in productivity loss at all. I'll put it differently. My own productivity, for instance, at the moment is much higher, because traveling from Badok to Buona Vista is a 1 hour trip in the morning and a 1 hour trip in the evening. I'm putting in a long, quite long hours these days, because I'm fairly new to the org, 3 months old. But productivity is fantastic. So I don't see any issues on that. And there is no micromanagement from our org perspective. Everyone is empowered. That is one of the core values of the organization. So it's been fantastic for us as such. I mean, maybe Lisa wants to add something to this.
Yeah, sure. We have rolled out just recently a flexible work program in anticipation of our employees going back to the office. So in the markets that we've operated in right across the globe, most of our employees have spent working in their home environments, and we've taken a cautious approach. So even though in some markets, we've had back to office activities, we've stepped a little bit back and taken a more cautious approach. So our people are very now well used to working remotely, and in some countries they hadn't been. So unlike Nikhil, you mentioned in India, where it was a common practice, for 𝗪𝗓𝗂𝗧, it hadn't been a common practice, and nor had it been in some other Asia Pacific countries. They were very much office-based locations, and I think some of that was shown in the research. A couple of the countries, such as China, for instance, our employees were used to going to the office and still do. So we're taking a very staged approach. For us, it's about an evolution, trying and testing the waters to see what's going to work, and being open to, that shift in mindset, that shift in, how is the culture going to evolve now that employees are so used to working remotely and working virtually in teams as opposed to being in the office together. I think there's the flip side of it that we are cautious of as well, and that is that we know that people are always on. Nikhil, you mentioned that. There are the benefits of not traveling. There's the benefits of being located, where you want to live, and that might not be in the city where the office is. But we also know that there are other things to consider, like being always on, work-related stress increasing, those types of issues. So there's a focus we have on well-being. So we're just taking it step by step. We're not trying to stop the tide. I think that we do believe that remote working is going to play a significant role in how we work in the future, but we're taking a very staged approach to that.
Maybe I'll just add on to what Lisa and Nikhil has shared. I think for us, I think the approach we are taking is just one is we realize you do not want to go out there and say, here's the hybrid, working policy or practices on a broad brush stroke and applies, to everybody in the organization. I think if the last 18 months or so, has kind of have taught us is every individual is unique, and how can you basically allow that uniqueness and be inclusive in terms of how they work best, right? So Now, we still believe fundamentally in our business to bring people back to the office, right? Because we believe, people need to, collaborate, co-create and to have that vibrant workplace. And that's important for us to kind of, get to the space of what we do, right? We discover, we develop, and we deliver drugs, to patients. So for us, that's still important. But I think what we are trying to do right now is really upskilling our managers to have that one-on-one individual conversations with individuals. Now, and that allows, basically individual needs to be considered as part of, the working arrangement. And I think at this point in time is, we're just going to take it and say we are comfortable that, let's say, for me, it might look very different. Let's say for Nikhil, it might look very different. For Lisa, it might look very different. So, and it's okay, right? As long as we all realize that, from a team basis, from, how we work within our own internal ecosystem, as well as external, if we, interact with external stakeholders, things get done. Just like what Nikhil said, right? We are not a company that, where we go and monitor how much hours, how many hours you put in your work. I think we are a very output, deliverables driven organization. And as long as those can be met in the context of, us, collaborating and co-creating and, working with others, I think that's fine. But my point is, managers are going to be really important for us, to upskill and have this conversation with the employees. So I think one cookie cutter approach is not going to work it.
Derek, sorry to interrupt, but I think you hit on a really good point, and that is that, managers, leaders need to be able to connect virtually. They need to then be able, like one-on-ones with their employees, but they need to be able to connect their people as a team virtually. They need to be able to deliver on the personal development that everyone is expecting as well, particularly in this digital age of, automation and all of the opportunities that lie ahead. So I think that there is a real need for a focus on leadership development, and of course then there's the innovation. How do we innovate where we used to have scrum meetings in the office, and now we're doing that virtually. And so how do we continue to innovate in our organisations in this kind of new way of working? That's another challenge yet for leaders to be able to bring their teams together to do effectively.
So you guys raised some very important points, especially the part you just mentioned about leadership. It does seem like we're hearing from many companies that they're struggling with retention, struggling to hold on to the precious talent that they have. And leadership always plays a key role in that. Just curious to hear what kind of approaches might have worked for you. I mean, maybe it's the case that your companies are not experiencing big, turnover challenges, but I'd love to hear how you guys are approaching this.
Well, I guess the silence means we haven't really figured it out, right, Nikhil?
Well, I'm just a little bit. We're experiencing attrition before we even hire, so because there's such competition in the market that in fact retention is not only a topic that we talk about for our existing employees, but it's retention of candidates. Candidates have multiple offers. Nikhil knows what I'm talking about. You're based in India, Nikhil, and there are many options for candidates out in the market. So our retention activities are starting with candidates. We are trying to fast track recruiting processes. We are looking at trying to reduce the time to bring someone on board in our organisation. The administrative and the technology requirements to set them up. We're trying to reduce down those number of days. We are working on connection points. We have what's called pre-boarding. We're doing onboarding before the candidate is even starting. We're pre-boarding them. We're getting them set up. We're having managers having one-on-ones with candidates, not waiting until they turn up on the first day. That retention piece is really starting very early, and certainly the attraction piece we're working on as well. for the, to bring candidates in. And that's very much around, particularly in the technology space, around innovation opportunities and career opportunities. But I'd have to say the lion's share of what I've been involved in the last few weeks has been around coming up with retention strategies for candidates.
Just to add, Lisa, I'm based in Singapore, not India.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying your colleague was in.
My teams are
Okay.
based in India, Singapore, Taiwan, Philippines, and a few other locations.
Right.
So
Okay.
so just to add to what you said, so interesting. I mean, I'm with you completely on this, and I can relate to you. I had a case, not here, but in my last talk, where we hired a person. He joined on a Monday. He went for lunch on a Wednesday afternoon and never came back. The following Monday, we saw him in a company 2 floors above us. So that reiterates the fact what Lisa said, that the pre-onboarding, for instance, I've got a fantastic team here, and what these guys have done, where it is a 1.5 to 2 months notice period, they've got engagement activities per week lined up for these people till they onboarded. Per week, we've got something. So I'm talking, the engineering head is talking, CTO is talking, HR is talking, plus we sending them technology books, some stuff for them to read, and also even before they come on board, a week or 10 days before they come on board, we've got a joiner kit from Carousel, and they get a MacBook, which is sent across to them. And then we have more engagement till they join. And after they join, again, we have checkpoints which are in place. We have obviously a standard thing is a buddy system, but we have checkpoints in place within the teams, across the teams. Someone is talking to them, making sure they're settled, and our head of HR is involved. Again, our numbers are not huge as maybe for Derek and Lisa, but we've got that involvement there. And again, I'll add a slightly different dimension to this. From a hiring perspective, there are 2 things differently that we're doing. And when I came into Carousel 3 months back, I was like, wow, this is long, 6 rounds, 8 rounds of interviews. But then I started speaking to candidates who got selected, and they were coming on board with us. And they said they love our process. 6, 7 rounds of interviews, they get a full spectrum of what the organization is about. And they get to talk to one of the co-founders. Every person that is hired into Carousel, including an intern, is spoken to by my boss, who's one of the 3 co-founders in Carousel. Okay, so we are able to attract a lot of people because of this, because of the transparency that we have, because of the insights they get into our culture, because someone goes into one of those review websites, I can't take the name, and there the co-founder has replied to every question that has been thrown at us. He's personally replying to it. So these are small things, but in today's world, you need a differentiator from the 500 other companies that are hiring. Yeah, so again, I mean, I've 23, 24 years in talent acquisition, but I'm learning on a daily basis. These are new things thrown at me, and I'm learning on a daily basis. But interesting times and challenging times, but definitely solutions are always there.
Yeah,
This is awesome. And I think we could go on for a much longer time. I do want to be sensitive to our time. I wanted to give the audience a chance to ask. We're coming up to the last 10 minutes of our session. So I just wanted to give the audience a chance. We will not be able to take audio questions, but if you have questions for the panelists, if you could please type it in the Zoom chat box, and make certain you're typing for everyone, then we will, we will probably only be able to answer a few questions. I'm so sorry, but the panelists were saying such interesting things, so I wanted to give them more time to really add value. So here's one of the questions that comes through. Any advice, and maybe we could start with you, Derek, any advice for a company that's looking for an optimum way to kind of do hybrid working? I mean, is anything work that you would pass along to others?
No, I probably in 2 sense. I mean, one is I'll probably reiterate again. I think we have to understand the context of the work itself, right? I mean, it's easy that the shiniest object in today's conversation in HR is hybrid, but it doesn't mean it's the right one, right? I mean, each and our organization might be very different. I think the key thing is to understand how we get work done, and how do we value basically the contribution and the impact of the work. Because unless we understand that, we can't really then move into say, am I going to be comfortable for the employees to do this off-site, right? So I think that's one, probably to think about. The other element is really, again, it goes back to not having one, kind of cookie cutter approach and say, here's our, flexible work arrangement, practice, or here's our hybrid practice. But I think the individual conversation is going to be really important. And if we can bring that as part of the process of, going into this, it will, in my mind, be more impactful.
Thank you so much. Another question that came through, a question about the Thailand market, especially. We're seeing a trend on Thailand attrition. Would like to know some of your key focus areas that you might, things you could do to try to retain some of your high performers. I know you guys were talking about the need to even, retain the people you're making offers to, but for the people that you're already working for your companies, any input on key retention practices?
I probably don't have too much input on Thailand. We do have a workforce in Thailand, but we don't have a huge attrition problem. In fact, Thailand is one of our markets where we're seeing our employees stay, possibly more than in other markets. So with the team there are close knit. It's a nice culture, in that environment in Thailand. We have lost a couple of staff, and those staff have been high achievers. So I suspect that could be the start of a some competition perhaps in that market, or niche skills being required in that market. But we're just still assessing that because we've not had a huge attrition issue in Thailand.
Okay. Maybe we can take a look at one or two other questions, and that's probably all the questions we're going to have time for, unfortunately, today. So one is, a person mentions about the issue of burnout as a major driver for attrition. And just curious if burnout, is that coming from more top management, or are you seeing more challenges of burnout at the top management level? Or are you seeing more issues of burnout from the mid to lower level employees? Anybody have an answer for that?
I don't know, but I'll kind of try to share my perspective about kind of the issue. And I think it is, I want to acknowledge, right, this is a conversation that we are having. I mean, I think probably made so-called obvious or worse in the last couple of months, because it's just like Nikhil, right? You kind of tend to be on all the time, and folks kind of feel it, and plus you really lost that face-to-face interaction. I mean, human beings being human beings. In my mind, if I can laugh in front or next to somebody, that's always going to be a different energy versus on the virtual basis. And if most of the time I'm on virtual, I kind of do get my jet fuel, so to speak, kind of depleted very, very soon. My thinking is in two ways. One is that we all need to understand burnout is kind of a loose term, right? But we need to understand what are the stressors, and and that stress cycle, so to speak, right? So what are the stressors? So it might be for Nikhil, it's like traveling from Bedok to Buena Vista, and that 1 hour being in a public transport is a stressor. And if you understand what causes that, and then your stress cycle, so when are you going through it, and then when does it go away? So it might be the moment Nikhil steps out from the MRT, he finds his best restaurant for a cup of coffee, that stress goes away. Now the question is, are we aware of that cycle, and we know how to break it? Now second is, I was just listening to somebody saying this concept of bubble of love. Now we can't do this alone. When we are burned out, it means we need somebody else to be with us. Now the question, do we know who are in our bubble of love that we can go and kind of get recharged, and the support that we need to come out of it? So I don't know. I mean, that's my perspective, and I hope it so-called spark some conversation and thinking. Not really a solution to the question.
Chris, just one thing to add to what Derek
yes,
said.
please, Nikhil.
From this perspective, I think the ownership also lies with the reporting manager here, understanding your people and making sure, because the engagement is now all distant. There's no face-to-face engagement where you're physically in the office, you know the pulse of the person. So managing that remotely is, I would say, is an art where, I mean, you may be the kind of manager who'll say that, look, hey, work 20 hours, 15 hours, get this done, but able to draw a line as a manager, and an employee also able to draw a line. So right now, for instance, I'm in this org 3 months. I'm continuously working from say 9 to 7 in the evening, back to backs, and 7 I start doing my mails. And I had a chat with the founder. I said, look, 3 months done. I've put certain things in place. I'm going to take these days off to charge myself, and then I'll get back. Straight away, he said, yes, Nick, you need to take a break and charge. So I know what my breaking point is. So as an employee, you need to know, and as a manager also, you need to know when to tell your person that, look, take a step back, take a break, and then come back. So it's a two-way thing which is there. So onus lies on both parties.
Great.
Well, this has been truly wonderful, and we are so thankful to have our panelists join us today. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, 𝗪𝗀. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up, as we want to be respectful of the time of all of our participants. So moving on, I just want to give a very brief, just a very brief overview of some of the ways. So clearly, many employers are struggling with large challenges as they think about building their workforce of the future, and maybe even their workforce of today. PERSOLKELLY is definitely very happy to be your partner in helping you to address some of these key challenges. So just wanted to point out that PERSOLKELLY, with its regional talent solutions, it's really set up to address some of these key issues: borderless recruitment, flexible workforce solutions, global professional employer organization, and HR advisory. All of these solutions really sort of address some of the headaches that companies have as they look for talent that may not necessarily be easy to be found locally. So just to address that briefly, right? So PERSOLKELLY Regional Talent Solutions helps address the pain points. Our service allows companies to hire and operate in overseas markets without the need to set up a foreign entity. We help manage employees onboarding, payroll, performance management, time zone differences, language and cultural barriers, and we ensure legal compliance. So if you're interested in learning more about any of the ways that PERSOLKELLY can be helpful to you, please don't hesitate to contact us. And for those of you that may not have had access to the Workforce Insights report that we were discussing throughout today's program, there is a QR code on your screen right now. You can take a picture with your smartphone, and then you can easily download that white paper that's available for free. So we welcome everyone to take a look at that report and get some of the insights from it. So we thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Derek, Nikhil, 𝗪𝗀, one more time. Thank you so much, Elvin, for setting aside some time to share with us today. Very much appreciated. We thank you all in the audience for being part of this wonderful conversation today. And we look forward to hearing from you and possibly helping you with any of your challenges as you build your future workforces. All right, signing off, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.